Good afternoon. Welcome to the March 18th Special Board of Education Town Hall meeting. We are glad you are here. Before I begin, I would like to share a few reminders. Please keep the aisles clear during our meeting to allow members of the school system and sheriff's department to move about. Also, except for when honoring our flag and our opening prayer, please remain seated during our meeting. We are planning to have a very productive meeting, and your help would be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much for that. Ms. Bowie, would you call the roll, please?
Good evening. Pete Wildebohr.
Present.
Pat Bradford.
I am here.
Josie Barnhart.
Here.
Stephanie Craybill.
Here.
Melissa Mason.
Here.
Hugh McManus. And Stephanie Walker.
Here.
And just a couple other quick reminders. Please remain respectful and courteous to all in attendance throughout the meeting. Refrain from using language that's lewd or obscene. Shouting, calling out, or making disruptive noises during the board meeting is prohibited. So thank you again for all that. At this point, we will have our invocation.
Yes, this is Travis Newton.
Please stand if you would like to.
And I'm calling to give the prayer for the school board tonight. Father in heaven, we thank you for the love that you have for us. And Lord, I pray for your spirit to help all those who are here to make decisions concerning the children and their education. Lord, please teach us all, as it says in Psalms 90:12, to number our days that we may present to you a heart of wisdom, knowing that each will one day leave this life and give an account to you for all of our lives. I pray for the fear of the Lord, which is the beginning of wisdom, that we would make righteous decisions in view of our Father in heaven who's watching us right now. And Lord, you said in Mark 10:14 to allow the children to come to you. And Lord, you said to not forbid them, for the kingdom of God belongs to these. And you also warned us, Lord, in Matthew 18:6, you warned us that whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in you to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Lord, knowing these things, that we're going to give an account to you for how we lead these children and what we do with them, and that you are indeed watching. Lord, I pray that your spirit would fall on this council and they would do what's right in your sight, knowing that every decision they make, they will give an account before the God of heaven. And so, Lord, having seen these things, I pray for your help and your grace upon each one of them, that you would give them your heart for your kids and that they would do what is right in your sight. And we pray this in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. If you would, please remain standing, face the flag, and I will be leading the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. We have a very short agenda, but a very important one. I would call for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
So moved by Ms. Bradford.
Second.
Second, Ms. Barnhart. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes 7-0. We will turn it over to our Master of Ceremonies today, Mr. Smith, and we thank you for putting this all together for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Josh Smith. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for the district. And so before we start, I want to cover just a few housekeeping items and how tonight's going to run. So we opened questions to submit 2 weeks ago. We received 556 from the public. Nearly 80% of those submitted identified as parents or guardians. 10% came from New Hanover County staff members and 5% from students. From these submissions, we identified recurring trends that include, but certainly aren't limited to, school safety, equity, calendar, access to books, budget, population growth, bullying, and transportation. So the structure of tonight's evening is going to look very similar to previous town halls. Were you able to attend or watch them, with one key difference. At the chairman's direction, we're going to open tonight's meeting, giving board members the opportunity to identify individual questions or themes from those submitted online, and then they'll have 3 minutes to respond. We'll We'll start with Ms. Walker, we'll move down to Ms. Craybill, and then go back. So 14 questions or themes will be addressed. After that segment, we'll move to the audience Q&A, which I'll moderate. I'll come around with a microphone. I'll work the room as systematically as I can from one side to the other and come back. And to allow as many attendants as possible to speak, I'd ask at least to get going, please refrain from two-part questions or multiple follow-ups, just so everybody has the opportunity to speak. Board members, as you share your chosen questions and answers, please be mindful of the 3-minute time limit, which we'll have over there. And I imagine this segment will take approximately 45 minutes. Once we've concluded this portion, we'll move on to the audience. We'll take our last question at 6:50 p.m. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Ms. Walker, I'll turn it over to you to identify your question.
Thank you. We had quite a few questions on calendar, so I'm going to kind of mash them together because I feel like they all pretty much follow the same theme, which was, why can't we start when we want to? Why do other counties are able to do it, but we can't? Why are some defying law and we're not? These were the themes that we got in a lot of our questions. And they're very valid. I know we had a very hard-fought discussion on the calendar, and with respect to our board, we did make a decision, so I just want to start there. There are a lot of reasons, and we're not the only ones in the state that have an issue with the way the calendar law and the constraints that we're under regarding that, and a lot of the pros to having flexibility are, one, aligning with the calendars for the dual enrolled students, the breaking and the testing before Christmas break, and aligning spring breaks and then there's revision that has to happen after our long break for testing. So those are a lot of the things that we had to discuss, and we're not the only district that has to deal with that. Saying that, I know that some of the questions kind of touched on why other districts are defying calendar law. The truth of it is, from what I gathered, there are 4 or 5, a handful of counties that are defying calendar law, have not had repercussions over that yet. We as a board did not want to defy calendar law, even though there are no really strong reasons why the law gives us that are penalties, So we still didn't feel like, as elected people, we wanted to defy the law. So that is one of the reasons why we didn't do Hanover do that. The other side of this discussion from our standpoint was that there was a belief that having 2 semesters that were uneven would not have been a good thing, because we would lose instructional time. So just to break down some of those kind of general questions about it. So going forward, really what we're trying to do, I'm keeping mindful of my time, what we were trying to do is figure out solutions. We didn't manage to work that out in time to have to pass a calendar, but obviously we're going to have more discussions coming up later in the year with the next year. And I personally would like to have a survey done. That would probably, as a person on calendar committee, I would like to see that happen. But I actually, in my research today, in preparation for our meeting, I did get to see a quote from Phil Berger from the legislature that basically, we had our representatives here local, let me just back up, that did support us having a change in calendar law on the House side, but I found out that the Senate does not want to take it up. There's some direct quotes, which I guess you guys can look up if you want to, that basically gives his reasoning on that. The only way they would look at it in the Senate is if they want to figure out how to punish districts that do defy calendar law.
Thank you, Ms. Walker, appreciate it.
Talk to me later if you want to know more.
We'll reset the clock. Mr. McManus, go ahead, please.
There were several statements, questions about discipline. Let me say, I don't know how many of you have actually looked at the policies. The board makes the policy decisions. The superintendent translates those policies into the school systems, of which discipline is one. So it's the superintendent's requirement to handle discipline in the schools. We just made the policy. And if you will look at 4300, which is the general student behavior, and go to the Board of Ed, look under policies. And it says, the reasons for managing student behavior are to create an orderly environment where students can learn. Disruptive behavior, which is 4, cannot and will not be tolerated. The superintendent shall incorporate information from such policies into a code of student contact that notifies students of the behavior expected of them, and so forth. There's A, B, C, D, and E under 4300. I want to say D, the consequences for violations particularly include suspension, removal from school, student conferences, parental involvement, going to some type of counseling. Those are usually minor. Serious violations says that serious violations that threaten to substantially disrupt the educational environment may result in long-term suspension. And serious violations that threaten the safety of students, school employees, and school visitors. E, enforcement. The superintendent is responsible for supervising the enforcement of the Code of Student Conduct, to ensure the school disciplinary procedures are uniformly and fairly applied throughout the school system. Prohibited behaviors, there are 8 of them, but the main one is the disruption or unorderly conduct of students, whether it's a school, anything that is school activity, buses, field trips, etc. Being on campus, bus stops. Obviously, the superintendent works through the principals, and so the principals are the at-site and or their designees, which could be assistant principals or deans. So if you have an issue with a disciplinary situation, you would go through, to me, the hierarchy, having been a principal myself, go through the principal, then go to the superintendent. Follow the chain of command. But I want to make sure that you understood, and that's 4301, the authority of school personnel. And then I'll be doing bullying with my second round. But the superintendent is an appeal agent after you've dealt with the principal if you have other questions and other things to deal with.
All right, thank you, sir. We yield 23 minutes back. Ms. Mason, go ahead, please.
Thank you.
20 seconds, sorry.
Yeah, I was like, that's a long time for Mr. McManus to talk. 23 minutes. The question that I chose was actually written in Spanish. And so I had to go to Google Translate. And of course, Google Translate we know can be faulty. But what I understood from the Google Translate question was, why can't I have a meeting with the teachers at my son's school? And so what that led me to be concerned about is, what access do parents have to parents who are multilingual, parents who don't speak English? What access do they have to our resources that we have here? So I did a lot of digging. What I found out is, at this point in time, we have 2,037 students that are multilingual. We have 37 teachers for those, or that are also multilingual. The multilingual teachers are allocated to schools based on both student enrollment numbers as well as teacher ratios and student need based on access testing. We have also 4 full-time and 2 part-time family liaisons. What they do is they serve as a go-between, obviously, between the parents and the school. A lot of parents families come from countries that their schools don't look like ours. And so they don't know how to get the services they need. And so those liaisons are a great support for them. I also asked how many translators or interpreters we have. We have deaf students, we have Spanish-speaking students, we have a variety of other languages within our school community. So how do we address that? And what I was told is that our family liaisons at this point, they complete the translating and or the interpretation. And if the schools have additional staff, they'll translate documents. If there are families that speak languages other than Spanish, then we have to provide that translation through a third party. And so I wanted to be able to share the information for the parent who asked that question, but I'm not fluent. I am fluent in ASL. So I know that there's a deaf community, so I wanted to share with them as well what resources we have for them. I'm going to be using what is called simultaneous communication. So for any parent who is struggling with language barriers, there are 3 resources you can use. You can reach out to your school principal to set up a meeting. Can I finish?
Yeah, please finish.
For that interpreter. and make sure that you allow time for that to be set up. You can contact the lead family liaison directly, and she will assist you. Or you can utilize the information on the website that if you go to the main page, you can find it under communities or students and families. So.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Mason.
Good job.
Ms. Bradford.
Okay. We had a number of people who ask about books. So let me explain. There's been a lot of inflaming language. There's been a lot of hysteria, and not dissing the media, but the media didn't help the situation. So there's 7 of us up here. See, 7 of us. The law says that we can't talk to each other as a group. It's called the open meeting law. So we can't get together and say, hey, how do you feel about books? How do you feel about books? We just take input from you. We get email, but we can't talk to each other. So Ms. Mason followed policy and asked to have a discussion on the agenda. It was a discussion. She wanted to know how every one of us felt about that issue. It was never up for a vote. She didn't ask to have it up for a vote. So all of the rhetoric that was thrown at that was really not really needed. We can calm this thing down. Right now, the state is considering the General Assembly in North Carolina, in the House, they're considering forming a policy there that would require us to have book review. So we're going to wait. I'm going to wait and see what the state does before I say another word about it. So hopefully that will put to rest some of the just panic over books for right now. Thank you.
Do I get her extra time? First off, I do feel for everyone that has to speak in 2 minutes because, wow. But there were a lot of questions about safety, so I took that on. It's a very, very important topic. I'm going to be discussing one aspect of it. Mr. McManus and others will be discussing other aspects. I sat down and discussed this with Mr. Silverstein, who is our County Executive Director of Safety. The board as a whole sees this as an extremely important and we see that in our strategic plan. It's one of the most important things, so much so that we actually had an outside group come talk to us back in our retreat in January. One question that's raised time and time again is, why don't we have metal detectors at each school? That's a great question. Sitting down with our executive director, he shared that there are several reasons. One is that it gives the wrong impression. We don't want our schools to look like prisons. Some of the other concerns are that at least one of our schools has over 60 exterior doors. So if you have a metal detector at one door, someone can get something in, contraband or whatever else through any of the other doors. It gives a false sense of security. Additionally, trying to get several thousand in some of our schools, students through metal detectors would be a logistical concern. You see that at airports, and trying to do the same and not losing instructional time would be very difficult. One thing that everyone can do, and I would advise you to do, is to become involved at your school. There is a safety team at each school. They meet monthly. This team is made up as the SRO, the administrators, teachers, and other faculty members, including a counselor. Some counties actually have community on that. Others, like ours, does not actually have that. But there are other opportunities, like the Principals Advisory Committee, which is at every school. Bring that safety concern to the principal, assistant principal, and then that administration can work on that. Just some things we are doing in every school. Every exterior door is locked during school except for during the brief class changes. Every visitor has to be buzzed in through the video buzzer system. Every school has an SRO. Not every county has that. Our county has at least one, and several of our schools have multiple SROs. There's ongoing training by the safety team, which meets monthly. Mr. Silverstein meets at least twice a year with the district safety team. Most schools have a vestibule situation where the visitors actually have to go through a vestibule to get to the main part of the building. We have at least 2 lockdown drills each year. Some groups, some schools have a thing called watchdogs or similar groups, parents that walk around and are actually helping to keep the school safe. So I asked your principal about that. There are over 2,000 cameras in our schools, outside our schools, on buses. And finally, there's been some discussion between board members and county commissioners about the possibility of a bond in the near future, and we could use some of those funds for increased safety at our schools. Sorry, I'm over. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Barnhart, please.
So the first question that I picked is, somebody submitted about where are we on the schedule for the Isaac Bear Building and why can't we get buses for the Science Olympiad? So the easy part to the question is to say, go to your principal and there's an allotment for funding when you're talking about extracurriculars. And if there is no more funding left, then he would reach out to the district level. The Isaac Bear Building is something, when you look at all of our high schools and all of our schools in New Hanover County, what is great about what we do is we have so many opportunities for students. So the Isaac Bear Building, currently our students are in a mobile that is housed by UNCW. So this is really a collaboration partnership with them. The first 2 years, the 9th and 10th graders are New Hanover County enrolled, and then the last 2 years, they're actually getting college credit on UNCW campus. So this is going to be a combination of a lot of different individuals, New Hanover County schools, our county commissioners, state legislators, because what we're looking at doing is having space on UNCW's campus. So I believe it was last year, the General Assembly had passed funding to do the drafts for the new building. What that would do, roughly the capacity, I don't know if the number is 260 or 240, how many students are being served at that school. We would basically be able to double that capacity and how many students we're actually being able to serve. But with that is a high price tag. So they're in the draft stages of that. And I know Ms. Walker and Mr. McManus were in the ad hoc committee that discussed some of that. I know there are still conversations happening about that because I had the opportunity as my principal for a day shadow program to be at Isaac Bear, and he actually showed me what the drafts look like at this current time. They're still receiving input. They're still looking at a couple different designs to go along with the university look, but then to be applicable to the high school demographic that we serve and what that looks like. The big question is the money. It's going to be roughly, they said at the time, $16 million to build a building like this. And so where does it come from? It comes from collaboration and the ask. I know in policy this morning, we were discussing potentially for us to have a legislative agenda. So I see that being something that we would discuss and ultimately have to go to a vote before the board. So I'm not saying that that's happened yet, but being able to move forward, we need to be able to utilize the resources we have. So we'd be reaching out to our county commissioners. That might mean a bond. That might mean an initial ask. That might mean going to the General Assembly to talk about the financing for this. So where we're at right now is we have the funding for the drafts, and the drafts are in progress, and they're working on the relationship of what that needs to look like and how that needs to be designed, but that's where we are.
All right, thank you, Ms. Barnhart. Ms. Craybill, double whammy, you have 2 questions.
Okay. Well, first of all, it seems like we all have a little bit of a common theme on the communication and how to get answers. So mine is going to be, piggybacking off of that. We had about we have 556 questions. So picking 1 or 2 to answer is really kind of hard. So what many of us do is we lumped them all together in sort of a category. My category was that of communication, and many parents submitted, I don't know how to find things out. So I just wanted to kind of go through that again, that the district and the schools communicate with families in many different ways. Elementary primarily, hard copy backpack flyers, automated and individual personal calls, emails, the website, bulletin boards at key locations where parents come in to pick up their students. They have, family nights and different, information nights that the district and the school hosts. And so I would encourage you all to make sure you go to those, especially if you're interested in things like the curriculum and specific curriculums that you're looking at. And there is a hierarchy of leadership that we as the board also follow, and several people have already mentioned that, is that you go to your teacher first, to get information, or perhaps maybe your counselor, social worker, or family liaison if that the issue that you're trying to get resolved fits better with that person. Then you would go to your principal, and then after that, you would go to the principal's boss, who, there are three. Lauren Kefalonitis is over the elementary schools, Penny Presley is over secondary schools, and Jared Worthington is over our priority schools. And then they can get your questions disseminated to the right location in the school district. Finally, it would be the superintendent. Actually, I shouldn't say finally, then the superintendent. When folks email the Board of Education with their concerns and they haven't even gone to their principal or their teacher, that's kind of a blindside. No one really likes that, when that kind of thing happens. So it makes the principal and the teacher's job really difficult. But it also, there's no line of communication. So we're going to do the same thing. If we get your concern, we're going to send it out. And then also, too, use your PTA groups, your parent support groups. One of the questions that came that I wanted to answer is, why don't we have a special education PTA? And the answer is, we do. And Denise Yanone, who is a regular at our meetings, she comes to that. But it is sanctioned by the North Carolina PTA and is a member of the PTA Council. So we do have lots of different ways for you to get information from your peer group and from the school district.
All right, thank you. We'll go ahead and reset that clock. Go ahead, ma'am.
Take a breath. Okay, so the next topic that I chose, and I'm going to read two questions that are from the category. One of them is New Hanover County Schools currently using any form of CRT, including the new one that starts with an S, social something? And then, so that was kind of an interesting question. And then, in light of current increase in social and emotional concerns about school-age children, how can the BOE cut the number of social workers, counselors, SEL staff at this point? How do we address academic needs if students are struggling? So I just wanted to start off with, for those of you who don't know, CRT has two different acronyms. One is critical race theory, and one of those is culturally responsive thinking. The New Hanover County schools and most K through 12 education systems don't teach critical race theory. This is a college level, cross-disciplinary philosophy that is taught in law schools. The critical race theory is, critical race theory is not a synonym for culturally responsive thinking. The culturally responsive thinking is just a method of affirming students, ethnic and racial backgrounds, and it's intellectually vigorous for the students as they're learning. But my point here is not to debate the CRTs. It is rather to disconnect social emotional learning and equity and diversity inclusion from critical race theory. That the school district teaches social emotional development. Nothing about social emotional development is about race specifically. It's about acceptance of differences, not demeaning or being critical of any of those differences. New Hanover County Schools seeks educational equity, which is essentially ensuring that each student, all students, have what they need to develop to their full potential, regardless of where they live, their socioeconomic status, and any of the other protected topics. That we want to make sure that all students have full access to reach their full academic and social potential. So, and there was even a Senate bill in North Carolina that's attempting to address some of the cost implications of making sure that students get what they need to succeed. Both SEL and equity initiatives are interwoven into the fabric of what we do every day, because maintaining student positive outcomes and maintaining a healthy culture and climate for all of our students and staff is paramount. So here are the three topics I want you to take away. So safe, positive, engaging environments, skills for lifelong access, authentic partnerships, communication, and collaboration. That is what social emotional learning is all about. And isn't that what we want for all of our students? As I wrap up, I want to just say that fair and consistent does not mean the same thing as equitable. And although both are necessary in achieving healthy cultural climate, the consistency does not always necessarily equate to fairness. Students and staff have to be treated situationally to make sure that the positive outcomes are achieved.
Thank you, Ms. Craybill. Work back down the line. Ms. Barnhart, back to you, please.
Okay, I'm going to read this question out loud. He says, or she says, I'm a custodian. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but the school system is terrible to non-teachers. Why do teachers get all the credit? If I don't open and clean the school, the next morning teachers can't come to the building and teach the kids at the same time. So why do teachers get extra money and bonuses and I'm here longer than them? I'm not asking for more money, but we should all get the same bonus. And it said, terrible school system, I swear. And I stopped at this question because I value every single individual that works in our school system. Our custodian staff, our secretaries, our nurses, our guidance counselors, our social workers, our teachers, our TAs, everyone. Unfortunately, we have seen a decline in enrollment, and that means funding is cut. With that being said, we are not staying quiet. There's a lot of funding sources that education has access to through our state, through grants, through local endowment, and those applications have not been open yet for the endowment fund, but I know that they're going to be on it as soon as they do. And we are seeking to secure funding so that we can reallocate to treat all of our employees fairly. And with that being said, I know that sometimes money allocations, there are certain criteria that they have to be spent on. So there might be a grant that we receive that has to go towards a specific cause, whether that's technology devices or whether that's bonuses for specific categories like classified staff or unclassified staff. And I'm going to try to not get teary-eyed, but I remember Mr. Wildeber and I had initial conversations with Deb Hayes about potentially having an allotment bucket that we would have more flexibility to give bonuses to a class rather than saying teachers, but having classified staff and non-classified staff, but given the flexibility that we can show appreciation and value monetarily to all individuals. So hopefully we can continue to pick back up those kind of conversations. But with that being said, that this takes a lot of time and a lot of change to do. I think we've kind of set the groundwork and footwork on a lot of potential changes. But I want to end my time with saying I value our individuals that are in school every single day, working with our kids, for our students, to give them the best quality staff. And those custodians, when I was in the classroom, they would be the first and the last ones out and always make my day every conversation I have with them. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Ms. Barnhart. Mr. Wildewer, back to you.
I don't know if I can follow that, but my goodness, that's very, very true. My second topic is year-round schools. We have two great year-round schools, Coddington and Eaton. Most studies actually show that year-round education is preferable for most students, and the calendar is preferable. And in case you don't know, after when students and staff start becoming tired, it gives them a break. It gives them a chance to refresh. Instead of having a long summer break where students can actually face regression or falling back a little bit, it has an opportunity to remediate and to possibly accelerate some students. The intersession after 9 weeks gives students an opportunity to catch up before they get too far behind, which is also a positive. It also gives students that are doing well an opportunity to accelerate. If they want to come in during that intersession, they can accelerate and even get further ahead, which is great. It gives staff an opportunity. We're talking about money. It gives staff an opportunity a lot of times to earn some extra salary if they work during the intersession, which is that 3-week period again. So there's a lot of good things about year-round education. But there are some questions that we would have to face. One is, what middle school would you take over with the year-round? So that's a question that would have to be answered. And then students at that school, if they did not want to be in year-round, they would have to be relocated somewhere else. And I'm sure that a lot of those people probably wouldn't want to leave their middle school. Year-round school, I was thinking back, and year-round school is not something that we have not tried at the middle school level here in New Hanover County before. Back many years ago, we actually had at Noble Middle School a school within a school. We had 2 different tracks going on at Noble Middle School. There was a year-round track and what we call the normal schedule or the regular schedule. There were some concerns, there were some problems. One was the specials teachers because they had to work at both schools, both tracks, so they really didn't get any time off. So your art, your music, your PE teacher, as well as support staff, as we just mentioned, administrators, counselors, cafeteria workers, custodians, and bus drivers also had to work many extra hours. Another question comes up is extracurriculars, athletics, clubs. Would the year-round middle school have those? If they do, then those folks would have to come in during their intersession, their time off, their vacation, and to try out, to participate, to practice. Transportation, we're talking about some long bus rides because, say it was centrally located, you'd have people coming all the way from Carolina Beach or Castle Hayne to there. In a former district, we met as principals. We all thought it was a great idea. We really, really did. We went back to our schools. We talked to our PTAs, our PTOs, our parents, and there wasn't, at least in that school district, there wasn't a lot of positive response. But to summarize, I think that there's a lot of value in looking at year-round school and expanding it to middle school level. So I think we should keep the conversation up, and please continue to talk to us about it.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Ms. Bradford, please.
Okay. I'm going to talk about money. So many of you wrote us and said, why are you cutting positions? So I'm going to make a real simple economic lesson. $20, $40, $50. We have $50 in our budget to eat on every week. You with me? All right. So we go along and we do fine. Most weeks we have $1 left over. Everything's good. And then we have a really generous relative. And he says, I'm going to give you $20 more a week because I like you. Because you did this, you did that, whatever reason. Now you got $70, right? We're fat. We're going to have steak. We're going to go to Starbucks. We're going to treat our friends. We're going to buy a new outfit, new pair of shoes. And that rich Uncle Sam, he gives us that extra 20 for a whole year. And then he takes it back. Now we only have 50. Are we happy? No. But what's happened in that year? Inflation, cost of meat went up, bacon $6 a pound. We don't have money anymore. That's the position your school board is in. That's the position your school district is in. We got $90-some million from Uncle Sam. And they spent it. They spent it. They made everything fat. They got Starbucks. No, I'm kidding. They didn't get Starbucks. They made it fat. They added positions. Now the money's gone, and we have to live on our $50. But our $50 isn't $50 anymore. It's less. It's a simple economics lesson as to where we are in the county. Now let me take on a second one. Leandro. You may or may not have heard of Leandro. Leandro was a case where parents in 1994, some of you weren't born in 1994, they filed in court to argue that students in 5 low-wealth counties in the state didn't have access to an adequate education. Awesome thing to do, right? In 1997, the North Carolina Supreme Court said students have the constitutional right for every student to have a sound basic education. And it has been tied up in court ever since. So Leandro's been in court 29 years, if my math is right. 29 years. We can't access that money. The state legislature can't give us that money until it's stopped being in the court system. So for somebody to tell you, get that Leandro money and start spending it, they're misleading you. We don't have access to Leandro money. We won't until it stops being tied up in court. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford. Reset. Ms. Mason, back to you, please.
A lot of the questions, as Ms. Bradford said previously, were about the book review committee, and my name came up a lot, so I figured it'd probably be best to answer some of those questions since they were asked of me. I'm going to try and do the best I can because there were so many. I picked about 4 or 5. But there was concern about how the individuals selected to be on the committee are selected. And I said first come, first serve. My justification is this way, we're weeding out anybody cherry picking. If it is a first come, first serve, there is limited opportunity for anybody who is running this committee or who is getting members to go, oh, I want this friend and this friend. If you are there in line, you are there in line. And though it's flawed right now, I think that it's a start for us. And then the qualifications and things that are important. Again, this is all ideas, this is discussion, which is something I'm going to address in a minute too. This is all discussion. And so really for me, the most important qualification is, are they safe? So we would need background checks and fingerprints of anybody who is working or serving on this committee, because we want it to be a safe environment. I believe and I respect every individual in this room, whether they want to believe me or not. I do respect every individual in this room. I respect their beliefs. I respect their education. And I believe that our community is very well educated and is qualified to be able to serve on this particular committee. And I think that it's so diverse that we would all, our students would all benefit from people who are invested in our kids. The status, as I said before, we're discussing it. We're not setting it up yet because we don't have the structure of it. We're waiting, as Ms. Bradford had mentioned, on what the state is going to do. We don't know if they're going to require it or not, but I do want to start the discussion that if they do require it, we have some form of beginning structure already established. And so right now, we're just talking to each other, getting feedback. The last meeting was really all about discussion. And so we need to talk about policy, we need to talk about procedures, we need to talk about who's going to be on it. And all of those things are details that we have to hash out, and it's not going to happen overnight because we want to do it correctly and we want to do it well. So.
Thank you, Ms. Mason. Mr. McManus, back to you.
I thought I had, Ms. Bradford, you can meet as a group, but you can't have more than 3 because 4 is a majority, so you can have 3 different meetings. And you're invited, all the board and the auditors, to your house for steaks and lunch. And so if you'll give your address. Once again, there were more statements than actual questions. One person did say, why my child has been bullied all year long, they're only sent to the guidance counselor and or teacher for help. I don't know that that's valid, but that's what I'm responding to. That is certain others that I believe. Policy 4329, 7311. Again, another policy, another board head. Bullying or harassing behavior. The board is committed to providing a safe and inviting and civil education environment for all students. The board recognizes bullying or harassing behavior creates an atmosphere of fear, distracts from the safe environment necessary for student learning, and may lead to more serious misconduct or violence. So our policies prevent and prohibit bullying and harassment. There is a federal law, by the way, 1710, 40, 27, 230, where we've listed prohibiting harassment based on race, color, national origin, disability, religion. You can take out a warrant if someone is bullying you, go to the police. Now that throws you into the social media, and that leads me into social media. Examples of behavior for harassing and bullying: spreading rumors, derogatory or lewd comments, name calling, put downs, putting things in kids' lockers, offensive statements in front of other people. Social media is the most destructive thing that we have with bullying. I think, I'll stop and say it at this point, we need to add social bullying, specifically we dealt with immediately. Because I've been a high school principal more than half of my life. And I'm telling you, I've been more than half my life. It is the absolute worst thing that can happen to a child. They're withdrawn, their grades go down, they're isolated, people continue to say things, particularly posting. There are ways to stop that. There are ways to stop it, legal ways to stop that. It has to be addressed. It creates a hostile environment by substantially. This is our policy. By substantially interfering with or impairing a student's educational performance, opportunities, or benefits. Who can report? Parents, friends, other students, anyone can report it. And I would say, again, report that, go through the chain of command. Counselors don't always share. They're bound not to share a lot if the student says so. I would suggest that you as a parent or if someone, you go directly to the principal. That's where you want to share it.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Walker, bring us home for this part, please.
Thank you. My next category was population growth. There were some themes here: overcrowding. What about future development? How about, the growth of our county overall? There were very specific questions about Porter's Neck Elementary. Most of our high schools and some of our middle schools. I will add that some of our schools are under-enrolled, just for y'all's information. I'll read a specific question, which pretty much encompasses most of what was asked. With all the building in New Hanover County, where the commissioners have approved, our already overcrowded schools cannot possibly accommodate the influx of children moving in. What plan do you have to address the overcrowding at every school? Does the Board of Ed discuss the overcrowding and need for new schools with the county commissioners? So, yes, and we have an update on that, and we actually did talk about this at our last meeting. But I will say that we have had preliminary discussions, as our chair mentioned, about a potential bond. It is entirely up to them whether they put it on the ballot. And like I said, they know, because we've had conversations about what's going on, especially in pockets of our community. They are essential to this conversation, and so they have actually approved for us to do let me get the correct wording here, of future utilization study, demographic utilization study, which is basically going to take a look. Those are the first steps to doing a potential bond, because we need to know where the growth is happening in our county. We need to know what pockets are growing more than others, and if we're going to need new buildings, they're going to have to help us with that, because we are not a money-making entity. We don't create, a lot of the money for building has to come from our county. And it's specifically what this utilization study will do. It will look at population estimate forecasts for from years past, 2020, 2025, and 2030 by age, sex, and total population for 22 elementary, 8 middle school, and 4 high schools attendance in our district. Enrollment forecast by grade for the years 23, 24 to 2032, 2033, inclusive for all the schools that I just mentioned. And they'll do an executive summary that will describe the methodology, assumptions used, calculations of the forecast, et cetera, including undercounted populations, which that was one of the questions I had. We just had a census done, obviously it's every 10 years, and some of our population is undercounted, so that was important. So basically, once we get that study, they're going to present to us and to you guys, and we're going to see where we need to potentially utilize our space better. If we have under enrollment, we're going to have to really take a look at that, because voters are not going to want to vote on a bond that if we're not using our space properly, if we're not using all the okay. So look out for that, and just look on our April's agenda for all the information on the study.
All right, thank you all. We're going to move on to part 2 and not waste any time doing so. Just a few logistics. Board members, just please make sure your mics are on in response to these questions. Anita, let's get the actual question out from the audience members before we start the timer. And folks, we have exactly 1 hour for this portion. Even with this relatively modest audience, not every single person is going to get the opportunity to ask the question. So I'm going to work the room left to right. I'd ask this section right here if you have a question poised and ready to go. I'm going to start with you, sir.
Can you hold it while I read this? Thanks. The short-term suspension policy 4351 states that before a student receives an out-of-school suspension, quote, the student has the right to be present at an informal hearing, but does not have the right to have a parent or other representative present. Okay, so now think about a 4, 5, 6, or 7-year-old child at this hearing who, quote, shall be informed of the charges and the basis for the accusations against him or her, and may make statements in defense or mitigation of the charges. The student also may request that the principal hear from persons whom the student claims can speak on his or her behalf. If the student reasonably claims the need for additional time to present such persons, the principal may postpone action for a reasonable time, end quote. I don't think it's reasonable to expect any 4, 5, 6, or 7-year-old child to do those things, let alone even think about them. Would you consider having the policy committee review policy 4351 and revise it to allow a parent the right to be present at an informal hearing for their 4, 5, 6, or 7-year-old, either in person, over the phone, or on a Zoom call. Thank you.
Okay, so question is, consider a revision to the policy. Let's go ahead and start the clock. Anyone willing to open this up? Mr. McManus.
I'm glad to answer that. I don't know the validity of who and where what you said takes place or other places, but the question that you read bothers me. If that is a parent, any child, a parent has a right to be involved from the beginning. Now, if I'm asking you if you did something, that's a different story, but if you did it, then I need to involve the parent. So I don't know if that's something that the policy committee would want to review or not. I don't know, again, everything, even the 556, the validity. But the way you said it was that kids are called in and the parents are not involved.
Ms. Crable.
Yeah, I would just say that, first of all, we don't suspend 4-year-olds at all. And 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, we've already adopted the policy that it's last resort. And like I'm speaking with with same in line Mr. McManus, is we would never do that, to a little kid. But I think before it even comes to policy, we should check with, Julie Varnum and Dr. Faust and all of those school system people who are responsible for that before it should come to policy. I mean, we need to verify what that says. That is the first time I've ever heard it put in that regard, and I just can't even imagine any principal sitting a little 5-year-old down and doing that. So that would be my suggestion, that it's not time for policy for that.
Mason?
Ms. Mason?
I actually just looked up exactly what you read, and I do see it right there, and it is definitely concerning. Even if a child isn't 4, 5, or 6, I think a parent should be present. Parents should know what's going on with their kids, and I think I don't think it's a terrible idea to look at it in policy.
Any additional comments? Ms. Bradford?
I'd be willing, based on looking at that, I don't want a 4, 5, 6, or 7-year-old not to have the right to have a parent there.
At least, and if I could add, being an ex-elementary principal, you may have a situation where you can't reach somebody, but at least make that phone call. I got Johnny or Susie or whoever it may be in my office. We're talking about this, that, or the other thing. I'm going to put you on speakerphone so you can at least be part of that conversation. So.
Yeah, and I would echo that sentiment. I think at any level, it's the heartstrings of the 4, 5, and 6-year-old, but at any level, when you're talking about a child who is clearly expressing issues that's going on, we need to involve the family unit. And so sometimes that's a parent or guardian, or sometimes that looks like a child advocate. And so we need to be cognizant of who those adults are in those kids' lives. And so I wrote it down on my paper, so as I make policy, so thanks for bringing that up.
All right, thank you all. Let's reset the clock. I'm going to move to this general area in the middle here. I'm going to come back and see you. Let's go here.
Good evening. I have a real simple question, really. As a board member, are you seeking to understand or to be understood? And I ask this in part because our county is very divided. And many of you think you were elected to represent those who voted for you. But in fact, your job is to represent all of us parents and kids in this county. And if you're seeking to understand, that means you should be open to listening to all voices who speak, especially the called audience. As reported by WHUR, 40% of speakers last time spoke about not banning books, were against the book review committee, and about 30% wanted to ban or challenge books. But more than half of you noted that you wanted to create this book review committee, effectively assigning a group chance to kind of review books, report back, all of that such. And I'm just curious because, again, are you just kind of listening to those that you want to listen to, or are you actually listening to parents who are raising this concern, especially if it's 40%, good portion of our population saying, please don't do this, but yet the majority of the board says, let's do this.
All right. Ms. Crable, kick us off.
I just wanted to say I am in the seeking to understand category, and I was hanging some artwork up at the Community Arts Center last week, and some students were having some classes down underneath. And one came up with a parent and was talking about, the mom introduced me as a school board member. And so she said, the little fifth grader, so you're going to be like banning books? And she said, we read a book in Battle of the Books, North Carolina approved, called Ban This Book, and where they actually read it and discussed it and had to review the facts. So I was so impressed with this little fifth grader actually having an opinion and a thought on that I went out and bought the book, and read it. So I am ready for book banning, material to come up if people want to do that. But seeking to understand, fifth graders, students have a voice.
Any other comments?
Welcome. Jesse, you go next.
I feel like that's a yes and question that you just asked, is there's both. They're being able to understand and have an open dialogue with people that you disagree with or you have commonalities. And I feel like our job is to first, we all have things in common. If you start talking about something, we do have a common center point. And there's going to be differences of opinions of things, but we do have a common center point. And what we have to do is being able to see where we agree and then be able to expand and hear both sides of the argument, because there is a lot of gray questions that come up to say, what is this, what is that? And so as far as curriculum and content, one of the things that I have been grateful that we have taken steps for in New Hanover County is the accessibility to a curriculum website and being able to share what is being taught, where it's being taught, the consistency across the board, not this board, but the consistency across the district, so that any first grader is being taught the same content, is having access to the same content, those sorts of things. And so when I try to make my decisions, I'm taking in input, but looking at the process. Are we doing things consistently across the district? Are there hiccups? Why are there hiccups? Why are there differences? And when you take the emotional aspect of we all have differences of opinion out of it, and you look through the lens of a process, it makes it easier to be able to help other people understand, myself included, so.
Go ahead.
Oh, I only got a few seconds. I just want to speak to the larger discussion about our constituents. And I know this is an elected position, but that the point is very well taken that, when we switch from campaign mode to actually governing mode, we get, and it's a third year, just give me a couple more, I swear I'll be hurry. When you switch that over to that, you're going to get a lot of feedback from people, and especially if there are topics that are very, very hot or of the moment. And for me and for some of us, it was the COVID and the masking and keeping kids in school or not. And we take a lot up here. I mean, we probably more than any governing body I know of, especially during call to audience, we take a lot, and it's hard. But the point is taken that, we do have to listen to as many as we can. And what we try and do is do the best we can when we're up here. At least I'm going to speak for myself when I say that. I try and learn as much as I can, and I try and listen to as many people. And at the end of the day, my vote is my voice, and the majority rules. So 4 is the magic number. So your point is well taken about being understood. So thank you.
All right, thank you all. Let's move to this section right here. Anything ready right here? Moving over this way. I was just right there. Right here.
Hi there. I just have a question about accountability as it relates to policy, and it actually ties in a little bit about the book review committee discussion. And that is, we have policy 3210, which standardizes and creates objectives for books to be chosen, supplementary materials to be chosen in the schools. So we already have a process for that, and that responsibility is delegated, as I understand it, from you all to the MTAC committee, the Media Technology Advisory Committee, which is at each high school or each school. And my question is, how are we doing to monitor those committees? How often do those committee members rotate out? What type of objective accountability and perspective do we have between schools to enforce the objectives? And maybe as a possibility in the future, can we tie in the book review committee as you're trying to create it to what's already in existence as an accountability measure? And I'm just curious how you all also are checking in on those committees.
Ms. Crable.
I would just say this, is that that's not our job to do that monitoring. That is Dr. Faust and his staff to do that. So with them not being here, and I don't know the answer to that, but I do know the answer. That is not what the Board of Education does, is to monitor that kind of thing. That's not in our scope.
Ms. Walker?
I will just add that I'm looking at the policy right now, and I know about our processes for this particular discussion, and I feel like it is very parent-centric, and I believe that's where it should begin. I did have a discussion with a librarian recently that had been through a process, and the parent was not liking a book that her kid read, and they dealt with it. Then the librarian marked his record, and he's not going to check that book out anymore. I really think it should begin there. I feel like my opinion, and I'll just say it is my opinion, that I think a small group should not be making a decision for all the 50,000+ parents we have in this district.
I'm just going to throw my 2 cents in on it too, but I think my concern, and I've seen this happen, where there's a school, maybe a high school, that says this book is concerning to us, but there's no dialogue between that high school and other schools. So I definitely hear Ms. Walker's point that maybe one group shouldn't have the ultimate say and say, well, you can ban it for everybody else, or you can't have that book anywhere else. But there should be some kind of dialogue, at least, that this book has been concerning at the high school level, because that book also could be at the middle school level, and that's again concerning.
Any additional comments on this one? All right, let's move to this. You're ready.
Good afternoon. About 5 years ago, for a matter of 5 years, I participated on a committee such as this, and it always constituted a librarian from the lower school and a librarian from the upper school. They're critical. And several more teachers, one representative of, to just have people first show up. You're going to get a particular group that, is really zealot about it. So that's all I'm trying to suggest. Moderate, and get representation from a couple teachers, librarians, and then your parents. Thank you.
Any thoughts or comments on that statement? Ms. Mason.
As I said before, and as I will continue to say, this is all a process. And so my suggestion was just that, a suggestion. If we want to add more, I think that that's something as a board that we can work together and we can figure it out. In conversation, I do believe that there does need to be more teacher representation, more media specialist representation, but I do not want to limit the amount of parent and community participation either. So,
Ms. Bradford.
I want to reiterate that there are 7 of us, 4 of us can't talk together. So if I want to know in an open board meeting how Ms. Walker feels about something, the only way I'm going to find out for real is to talk to her in an open board meeting. I can call her up and she might tell me one thing, but she may change her mind by the time we get to the board meeting. So the only way we know what the other one's thinking, okay, or we might meet out back because he's making that face at me, and I might say, I'm not ready to talk about that in an open board meeting. I'm not ready to move forward on a book review committee, and I'm not. But when we got here, I have issues with specifically sexually vulgar books for our younger students. I have issues with that. And the person asked earlier, do we want to be understood? Or I want to understand why in the world any one of you out there would want a sexually vulgar book in our schools for the kids. I want to know why. So you can see me after. You can see me after and tell me what that answer is. But we had a discussion, y'all. We had a discussion. We're not going to have a big bonfire here and start throwing books in it. Just calm this thing down. Just calm it right down. It's a long, drawn-out process. This ship doesn't turn all that quickly. So it's a long, drawn-out process. We're going to talk about it over months. We're going to come up with something, and then we'll vote on it, and it may or may not go. So everyone just calm down, please.
52 seconds, Ms.
Yeah, no,
Barnhart.
I was just going to say that, I'm sorry. I'm sorry,
Barnhart.
go ahead.
No, I just want to highlight a takeaway, though. being transparent is something that we are all passionate about, and I think Ms. Bradford just echoed that. So being able to have a discussion, yes, there was differences of opinion, and I'm grateful for that, because in order to grow, we have to be able to have open dialogue and differences of opinion. So if there's one nugget I'm going to pull from that, it is the open transparency, and at serving as a newcomer on this board, I'm grateful that we can have open dialogue, even sometimes contentious.
All right, any final, Mr. McManus, bring us home on this one.
I tried not to say anything.
Turn on.
It's on. It's on. That little light means it's on.
I can't see the light, I'm sorry. That's not what I need.
What bothers me is that I hear, because of the last election, the book banning was at the top of the list before we even got on board. What I hear from other people is this could be a Trojan horse to start reviews for everything that goes on, curriculum, classroom instruction, different committees and groups, etc. I think that's the fear that's being created. And once you get a leg in, then everything will be dealt with in that same manner. And that's not, we don't deal with that. We have staff members we have to trust. We make policy, they enforce it.
All right, thank you all.
Josh,
Back
I
to
just
this side of the
wanna
room.
say one last thing. To Ms. Bradford's point, I promise you I will never, I'm the same every time if I talk to you private or in public, just to say that.
All right.
Hello.
Hello.
We are coming up on the 4-year anniversary of when Michael Kelly pled guilty to sexually assaulting dozens of children in New Hanover County schools. With that, we have a new board, and there are a lot of things that the victims requested be changed. And one of those ideas that were being bounced around is a policy change that I have been pushing for months now. And that is with teachers, as y'all already know. If a teacher is accused of inappropriate relations with a child and it leads to a termination or resignation as part of the investigation, if the administrative staff opts to not send that to the state, I would like board oversight over that particular thing. Go into closed session, take a vote on it. And again, this does not have to affect the appellate process. It can be done after the appeals process is satisfied. So my question to the board is not even just about this specific policy, but when you're going to have problems working on these issues as it is because your attorney is, again, working for Liberty Mutual, the insurance company, as it was, that was a slap in the face to the victims. But now you're put in an interesting position where if people from the community like myself brings forward ideas, who are you supposed to ask for legal advice? Because you cannot ask Tharrington Smith because their duty is to a different entity. You cannot ask Mr. Sharpless because he's just involved with the insurance process. So please, can y'all please elaborate and let me know why it's almost like we're dragging feet on making some of these changes? Because again, this policy change that we're bringing forward, it doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't take a lot of money, and realistically, Dr. Faust said that he is going to be sending all things that could potentially, have accreditations removed. He was going to be sending them all to the state. So realistically, the policy shouldn't be used that much. So why are we kicking it down the road instead of enacting it? Thank you.
Ms.
We'll go right
Barnhart.
down the line.
I'll jump in. I know you and I have had conversations about this. So there's a few things. They're redoing the licensure and removal of licensure on the state level. And so I have brought up concerns, just like we've talked about prior, because I really feel the consequences and the justification on a state level can use some oversight and some changes as we're looking at that. And so what you're talking about is a process that we're not allowed to discuss closed session, but we get that intel when there is a review, and then we get what happens. And so that is indeed happening. And so, like I've said with you, I'm monitoring some of the things at the state level and as the update to do it all at one time. But it's not that that's not happening, at least since I've been sworn in. So I just want to give some assurance there, but I know that that's what I'm personally gaining insight for the collective whole. So to not just continuously review policies, but to one at a time.
Mr. Whittemore.
Well, I was just going to touch on another part that you asked, why are we staying with Arrington? We are going to actually, in the next couple of weeks, actually hear from multiple attorney firms, and the board will vote on which attorney firm to take in the coming year. So, it's not like we have blinders on and we're just staying with one attorney firm. We're looking at all the aspects you may have brought up, or you brought up, will be looked at also.
Mr. McManus.
I dressed Chris, about 22-pound turkey, 11-inch beard last week. I'll send you a picture. My understanding from several attorneys and my background in education dealing with staff and issues, I don't think this has changed lately. A person's personnel arena is absolutely, there's a state, you cannot discuss that. You better not tell your wife. I mean, you just don't discuss it. If a teacher, for whatever reason, elects to resign when they're called in about some situation, you still can't talk about it. They can, we can't. If they are convicted later, then we can. But my understanding presently is no matter how much it burns inside of you, it has to be a conviction. And then if it's 10 years later, technically a school could report it, as several wrote into some of the questions. But until they're convicted, you can't discuss personnel issues. You just can't. Sometimes we want to. We really want to.
Any final comment on that, Ms. Bradford? 16 seconds.
Just to address the part about the attorney, we are going to do that within the next week. We're going to hear from attorney firms, and if we make a change from Tharrington, we do, and that's that.
We need that all the time for you.
Good evening, board. So I have just a few questions. It's kind of a big one. So racial heat in this country and even in our county is at an all-time high right now. And I have a third grader right now, and he came home with homework, and he had multiple questions talking about racial division, and he had he's had an assignment come home now that talks about racism. I want to know if you all think that is appropriate for a third grader to come home with racism as part of a topic in third grade. That shouldn't be in their vocabulary. Children need to be children. And I know you all feel that way. Everybody in this room cares about their children. I care about their children. You are setting them up for so many bad hurdles. You are making people feel like they are going to be shamed or guilted for being born the way that they're born, or feeling that they are less than something else by teaching this at such a young age. We need to make a change. We could be the change for this state if we actually stand up and say that this is not acceptable at this age. We could introduce it in at another level. Like, this is not appropriate. I want someone please to address that. Thank you.
Ms. Crable.
Yeah, so I forgot to mention this part in my initial discussion when I was talking about critical race theory. In that is that I'm hoping that you've had this discussion that you're having with us, with your child's teacher, and with your child's principal, to look at the curriculum and the standards. Some of what they're teaching is straight from the DPI, Standard Course of Study, so those conversations need to be had. And if you have a problem with what you've heard, there is a official way to oppose that. You can look at policy 3200 and 3210, and you can ask for a review. So I would encourage you to do that.
Ms. Barnhart.
I'll add to that. In the summer of 2021, I believe, is when they updated the history standards. And what they did is they updated it to be inquiry-based learning. And what that allows for is interpretive teaching of history is essentially what happened. I'm telling you the timeline and these things. This concern, and some of us were not on the board at the time, but I remember listening to the curriculum committee, and the concern came from how are we going to present unbiased quality teaching for our students that's consistent across this district? That came from our curriculum committee because they understood what inquiry-based learning is and the different avenues that teachers can go with it depending on what narrative they want to push, if they want to. So the concern, I hear you. And so what we have done as a district and what I'm going to encourage us to continue to do is have access to a curriculum website of what is being taught, what should be taught. So if and when you pick up a folder and there's a concern about an issue, you look to see, is this what's supposed to be in the classroom? If the answer is no, that's a different concern for administrative level. So we have to look at, and Ms. Crable is right, we have to look at the standards that, to be taught, to look at that, but the way the North Carolina Constitution is set up, the governor appoints basically everybody in DPI to make the curriculum and content changes. So we are at a the graces of what we have to teach. And so the goal to be as transparent and consistent of what the expectation is, coming into this office, that's what I'm going to. But do I personally like it? No, I do not.
Final comments, Ms. Bradford, 30 seconds.
Okay. I believe that we should teach children how to think, not what to think. And I am concerned, but you're doing well. Anyone who has a concern about what their child comes home and tells them they learned in school, you follow the procedures that we've set out here today for you. You take it up the chain of command. You can also copy us on that email so that we can follow up back behind. But on a case-by-case basis, we have to go after every single one of these things every time it happens. That's how we make change.
All right, over here.
Policy 32T.
Hi. In what ways are you working with the county commissioners to help secure funds to ensure that our students have the support staff to help address their mental health needs and their social needs outside of the ESSER funds cuts? So what are you doing to work with the county commission to kind of help fill those gaps?
Mr. Wildebohr.
Well, we have been having repeated meetings with the county commissioners and having discussions on the budget as a whole. That's part of the budget, is trying to fill in some of those holes that the loss of ESSER funds have brought about. So we are going to continue those conversations because the state allotment, the state funding is the state funding. That's not something we can change. Federal funding is pretty much the same way. But the local funding is where we can actually go and say, hey, we need more money for this, that. And as I mentioned before, we've even talked about a bond. And of course, a bond wouldn't necessarily help in that area. But I mean, so we are trying to do everything we possibly can. We also had a group that went up to the legislation and talked with senators and, House of Representative members to, again, look for additional funding for just a variety of areas for our students and our staff.
Ms. Bradford.
If you want to follow what the county commission is doing in their budgets, they have budget meetings, same as we do. Now's the perfect time. Okay, you can watch those budget meetings and you can see what they're thinking, what they're saying. And they're saying, we're not going to give you any more money than the allocation per student is $3,334, okay? We have a capital budget, which is different for infrastructure and so on. But for per student, that money, we're not going to get any more. And I joke with the county commissioners because there's this misunderstanding out there in the community, and this might make you laugh, but you can quote me on this. They don't have a tree in the backyard down at the county commission where they pick money to give to the school board. They don't have that mythical tree. They're going to allocate the same as what they gave us last year or less. So we have to learn to live within our means, or we have to find grants. We have to go like we went to Raleigh. We took the superintendent with us, and we asked for stuff. The superintendent made at least 5 different presentations. We met with 7 different senators and representatives, but that's how we get the extra. But the county commission's probably not going to give us any more money. Watch their meetings and learn for yourself. Don't trust me on that. Watch it yourself and make your deduction from what you hear, because that's what I have deduced for the last 3 years running.
All right, Ms. Crable, final thought.
Okay, so to that point is we don't have to ask the county commissioners for money specifically for everything that we want to do. I do want to let you know that the county commission funds Port City United, which is providing mental health specialists in our schools to help us with those kind of things. They also fund Coastal Horizons nonprofit, who is one of our primary partners with, basically through the SHAC, the School Health Advisory Council. They fund a lot of more school nurses and mental health workers in our school system. So we don't have to always say, give us, $10,000 or $1 million, because they're already funding other agencies and organizations that we partner very, very successfully with.
All right, moving on.
This is very interesting. I fought for the budget all last year. Perfect backup what I'm about to say. First of all, you ask the commissioners, you just don't give up, okay? And there is $1.5 billion that was promised to our schools sitting in a bank right now. If you want to deny it, the commissioners know it. 4 to 5 vote, they can get it. $300 million is available right now. But you never give up. Leandro, by the way, Leandro in 2007, it was also decided again. It's the state legislature that's not giving that money. That is available. I was working in schools when they were giving it every year and stopped again. In 2008, when the Republicans took over, they stopped giving that money. You need to be able to talk to your legislatures and get them to release it, not keep going to court to stop it. Right. So here's the question. Which one of you up there are willing to ask the commissioners for that $1.5 million that was promised to our schools? Because you really need to care about the schools first, and all this other stuff is a bunch of red herrings, in my opinion, because our schools are imploding. Thank you.
Mr. McManus.
I don't have an answer for her right now, because it'll get me in trouble if I answer it, but I want to say the county commissioners, briefly, they provide over 700 local positions. Local means they pay their salaries. They pay their medical. They have to contribute toward their retirement. So when the state gives a raise to teachers, we have to come up with the money, which is part of our problem, is we have over almost 1,000 individuals. We've got to dig for that. 2, we have an explosion in this county. It's become a destination. The issue is, from Monkey Junction south, if you watch the woods slowly disappear every week you go by, they're building like crazy, all the way to the inlet, Pier Beach. If you go to Wilmington and you go to the Putnam County line to Hampstead, same thing. Building, building, building. You go north from Laney to the Putnam County line, you cross the Northeast Cape Fear River, great duck hunting place. They're building like crazy. Those schools are busting at the seams. Porter's Neck, we've ordered 4 trailers, very nice, aluminum walkways, but it's going to take us after next year to get them. And so we're trying, again, where do we get that money? Because all that growth is popping up, not in the city. There's nowhere in the city to build. On the outskirts. And we don't have the money. Thank you.
Ms. Barnhart.
And so I'm not going to hold up a sign to say 1.5, give it to me. But the reality is we have lost students and our academics have declined. So when you're coming to somebody who says, you want more money and you're now at 30% of your low performing schools, tell me what you're going to do with it. That has the question. So when people are making decisions to whether or not to give money, there has to be a plan in place of how it's going to get fixed. And so I have encouraged to say, tell me what does that look like so I can relay that. Because if people are going to give us money, they're going to buy into a plan of support, because when they hear how it's going to support students, and getting money means that we are able to reallocate to kind of take advantage and make sure that we have those positions that we need to support our students. And so what Dr. Faust and the team has done has been able to present some of these ideas of how to support our low performing schools and how to make it to a point that they're successful, because ultimately that's what we want. We want our students to be successful, and the people who are giving the money want our students to be successful. So when they hear a plan attached rather than a dollar amount just asked for, that helps sell them on it, if that makes sense.
Final thought, quickly, Ms. Walker, please.
Yeah, quickly, I don't have much time left, but I don't disagree with you, Ms. Justice. I feel like legislative where it's at. I feel like the county did say they have an allotment they're going to give us, but the endowment is the question. And I will say that with the community task force we're putting together, they are invited to the conversation. And I am hoping that we can really begin to decide how we can get hold of some of that money.
Thank you.
Thank you kindly. Hey, y'all. Congrats, 22 pounds. That's pretty impressive, Mr. McManus, for the turkey. Just to piggyback on the CRT question, first of all, critical race theory, an acronym, culturally relevant teaching, an acronym. It is wholesale untrue, respectfully, that critical race theory is not being pushed as an ideology and a pedagogy within the New Hanover County school system. If you look at the mandated equity training, there is a book by Robin DiAngelo on the suggested reading list called White Fragility. She's right up there with Ibram X. Kendi. I am sick and tired as a New Hanover County taxpayer, as the descendant of the founder of Isaac Bear Early College. Stop putting lipstick on a pig. You are indoctrinating our children with Marxist pedagogy. He's absolutely correct. Additionally, social emotional learning is based largely off of the ideology of Brazilian Marxist Paulo Freire, okay? It's not about my feelings. Social emotional learning is actually a generative style of teaching where you have educator and learner. Transformative SEL appeared on the scene in 2019. Interestingly enough, that's the same time that the United Nations changed the word from gender to gender identity. Identity politics is the mainframe of every school system in the country that is partnered with Castle out of Chicago, whose executives are members of Obama's former education cabinet. So from this point forward, yeah, I do have a question and I'll ask it. From this point forward, I want to know why we are shellacking our children in identity politics and things that are not focused on academics, like reading, writing, and arithmetic, as Ms. Bradford said. I also appreciate Ms. Bradford's clarification that this is a long conversation regarding the books, because a lot of those books are coming from comprehensive sexuality education. The printers, the publishers, and the people who peddle them are part of social emotional learning that's coming down through this pedagogy. So my challenge to you, it's less of a question and more of a request, is to please start being honest with yourselves and therefore with us about what is happening in our education system, because our children are suffering. I also don't appreciate the fact that the Wilmington School of the Arts, which is a elementary school, public charter, has an anonymous snitch page, Title IX. The school has children, so if it's for transgender protection, I think they're a little young for that. And if it's for sports, there's no interscholastic sports team there, so what's the point? Thank you.
Was there a question, Mr. Smith?
I
I didn't hear a question.
Any response in general?
The question is what I'm going to do about it. Can I start this?
Please, Ms. Walker.
I will just respectfully disagree. I'm going to respectfully disagree, but I understand what's happening in our society as it's changing. We had COVID happen, and I think a lot of us had this change awareness that we kind of started to kind of think about. And I don't have anything to do with the curriculum in the state. I know we follow what we are, supposed to be following, and that is the DPI that is handling that. But I'll tell you respectfully, as I disagree, I think conversations are being had that we've never really had before. We're at a different place than we have ever been when it comes to discussion on race. And, I don't know. I don't want to say too much because I think I'm trying to be as respectful as possible, but I will just say I respectfully disagree.
Any other comments on this? Ms. Bradford.
The gentleman who pointed out what his child brought home, that's the way you deal with this. If my phone rings constantly with people saying, guess what happened in school today with my child? So, I stood in front of this body as a member of the public one night, and I said, does it exist? And I said, if it exists, we need to deal with it. But if it doesn't exist, we don't. I messed that up. It's just kind of like the sexual abuse thing. Everybody kept saying, oh, it's not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening. Guess what? It was happening. So what if CRT is actually being taught? What if they're telling little children in third grade that they should hate somebody who's got a different skin color? What if that's actually happening in our schools? Are you prepared to be responsible for that? I'd like to uncover whether it's true or not. And the only way to find out is for parents to talk to their children every night, and then you just go ahead and report it up the chain, and you report it to us. And if we get overwhelmed with those kind of responses, then we know there's something we need to investigate. Because we can't just assume that we know what's happening in the school unless parents and children get involved in telling us, this is what happened in school today with my child.
Any final thought, Mr. Whittle,
If I
please?
could just throw two things out. One is, you look at Brunswick County, another county, they actually put a policy in place addressing this. So obviously they think there's a concern. Likewise, there were two bills in front of the governor, which he did not sign, that talked about that. So it is a possibility, a concern. It definitely is a concern. I would, mirror what Ms. Bradford said. I think it is important to talk to the teacher, talk to the administrator, talk to the superintendent if need be. Let us know what's going on because we do need to know what's going on in schools. That's why one of the reasons that I think all of us have been in schools a lot more, because we hear from parents, we hear from community members, but also we want to see what's going on by being in the schools.
All right, thank you.
Interesting that it's my turn. Ms. Crable, I heard you talking about CRT and social emotional learning and how it's not really taught as part of the curriculum. Well, let me tell you that I first learned about social emotional learning in 2005 when my oldest child had it introduced, his school introduced it to me. It was meant to make sure that children had the resources at home to come to school and be active learners during their day, to make sure that they had enough food, that they had shelter at home, and that they were safe at home. But now we have this thing called transformative SEL. From the Castle website, core features of transformative SEL focus first on race and ethnicity and includes academic content that integrates issues of race. That's from their website. That's their definition, not mine. So the last couple of years, the school board voted to bring in a company called Harmony SEL. Okay, Harmony SEL is provided to New Hanover County for free. Guess what, folks? Nothing in this world is free. So I did a little digging. Guess who funds Harmony SEL? Guess who provides that service, not just to New Hanover County, but all across the country? You may have heard of Kaiser Permanente, the largest provider of youth transgender affirming care in the country. So why would Kaiser pay for transformative SEL for free across the country? Well, because transformative SEL has a goal for comprehensive sexual education, which includes having young children learn all about themselves and explore their identities in every way. This isn't some out there in the ether thing. This is happening here in New Hanover County in little teeny tiny bits, with that third grader coming home asking a question about racism. It's happening every single day. Melissa, you ran your campaign on eliminating SEL from New Hanover County. Josie, you're the chair of the policy committee. Pete, you're sitting there as the chair of the board. I am asking all of you, eliminate structured SEL from our curriculum. It's not a mandate. There is no law in New Hanover County that is requiring it. Catherine Truitt's Operation Polaris suggests it. It's merely a recommendation. It's not required. Let's get rid of this once and for all, for the good of all of our children.
Center. Any responses? Going once, going twice. Moving on to here.
In light of the bullying that Mr. McManus talked of in the first part of the meeting. And in light of the policies that took away sports for middle school trans students to play on the team of their gender identity, where they can feel belonged, and in light of the cuts that Ms. Bradford talked about that we are enduring, because it's gone away, and we've had to cut positions for counseling for people who are being bullied and may not feel belonged in school. What are you guys planning on doing to support marginalized and vulnerable students within New Hanover County schools, including trans kids and including kids that look like me? That maybe SEL could teach these kids a little bit about people who don't look like them, which is the point of social emotional learning. What are we going to do in light of the cuts and in light of bullying and not including thinking about people that might be more marginalized than other students?
Ms. Barnhart.
I will say, I think mental health is a very individualized content for whoever we're dealing with. And I remember after the shooting in Texas, I think I had reached out to Josh. I was a candidate at the time. And I said, I want to know how we are sharing with our families how to get help. Because the question really, and this is a broad question that a lot of people ask, is what is the purpose of schools? Is because they have kind of encompassed a lot of roles. Some of it is crossover of parental roles too, and I'm not necessarily saying in a bad way, but here we have, where can we reestablish the distinction of what do schools have to do, what can we do, and then how can we provide connectors and supports? And so for me, when I look at issues, I believe that schools' primary focus is academics. I think that developmentally is always an underlying thing that teachers support. I know as a teacher I did, but what we can do in the school system is help to showcase where in our community, like Ms. Crable has said, that we have those outlets and those access for individuals. So I don't think that there's people up here saying we do not want to help support one another. It's a matter of whether or not the school system is going to be able to maintain all of the support network, knowing that mental health is very individualized, it is very encompassing, and we have to be understanding that the primary goal is academics. And so this is where the coin, and I say this, I would love to hear from other people on the board. We have 3 minutes to talk about this. This is a large encompassing topic. And so I don't think it's a one size fits all, but my best thing that I'm going to try to do is to help provide those connections so we do have access for our students and individuals, but we have to help reestablish where the line is of how in-depth schools themselves get involved in.
Ms. Crable.
So I kind of appreciate your thoughts on that, because students who are hungry come to school and it's a barrier to learning. Students who are experiencing adverse experiences at home come to school, they can't learn. Things are going on in their house every night, they can't learn, and because they can't focus. So the social emotional learning techniques that teachers are using is to try and bring, and one of the comments you said before, bring us to center so that everybody has a chance to succeed in their day. So it's not a brainwashing technique, and it is just a calming technique. Like some of us do yoga or some of us do meditative thinking. So I just wanted to put it on the same category as being hungry.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Crable, I'm sorry, but it's not your turn, ma'am.
All right. Hi, y'all. I just want to go on record and say, as a mixed race person in America, I definitely experienced racism in 3rd grade. So, whatever, it's real, whether you want to believe it or not. The question, though, comes from stemming off of being able to fund schools and having performance initiatives that can then, you can go to someone and say, give us this money. Reading a report here saying that New Hanover County schools are very segregated, percentage points and proficiency drops in schools that are majority black and not white, things along those lines. So I guess the question is, what are you going to do to help solve segregation and make sure that everybody has an equitable education so you can raise that average up to get the money that you want?
Mr. Whittemore.
Let me jump off. I'll be the first person to speak about that. We're looking at some of the schools, some of the lower performing schools. I'm going to mention Freeman. Freeman is a school that has been a low performing school year after year after year. The first thing that we have done, or we haven't done, but the school system has done necessarily, is we've looked at the leadership. We've got a great new principal there. I know him personally. He's turned other schools around. And he can't do it all by himself. Definitely not. As I said before, I think we need parent involvement. We need everything we can to help that school and every other school. We need to raise, the bar for each and every school. But I think we need to look at the low-performing schools. We have a task force that we're going to have to look at those low-performing schools and to do everything we can, whether it be reaching out to legislators, whether it be to our county commissioners, to get additional resources for those students to bring them on up there. So, the biggest thing I think is that there's two different ways to look at a school. You can look at growth or you can look at proficiency. Sitting down with Mr. Buchanan, he said, it may be a couple years before we can bring the proficiency up, but as long as we grow each student, not a year even, we need to grow the students, especially that are behind, a year and a half or 2 years every year. That's some of that could be funding, getting the best of the best teachers there that want to be at that school or schools like that. So we can bring, it's one of those situations we have to put all the minds we can together and support each and every student. Part of that is having teachers that know the students. I was very fortunate. I took over a low-performing school, and I was able to bring that school in, and I had nothing to do with it, I'll be honest. It was the faculty, because they worked their tails off, and that's what we need to do, is find folks that are willing to do that. I think we have a lot of folks that are willing to do that. With good leadership, we were able to turn some of those schools around.
Ms. Walker?
Thank you. So I grew up here in New Hanover County, and I know with a history in this country and in this state, in this county, we had a court case called Brown versus Board of Education, and the schools were integrated probably in early 70s, right before I started to go to school. And so I've never known anything different. When I grew up here, all our schools were typically integrated schools, based on the busing model. But about 13 years ago, that changed. That was one of my motivations for running, because I felt like what ended up happening with this new model, which is they deemed neighborhood schools model, was that, you go to the school that's closest to where you live. And that has created a pocket of some of our schools that are very high poverty schools. And unfortunately, we don't really talk about it enough like we should. To our chair's point, we do have a task force that I'm hoping that we can do a lot for our high priority schools. Those are classified as our Ds and F schools, but they need a lot, and they need community support. So if anybody's out there listening and really wants to be a part of our schools, I really recommend that you guys get into the schools, get your background checks first, but get into the schools and really help us, because this is what we need.
Thank you.
Hi. I wonder, when we're talking about curriculum, if there is anything built in that helps to teach the kids to improve their self-esteem. Because it seems that there have been topics this evening that have been mentioned that make them victims. And I totally believe that, bullying happens. It's been happening. I'm old, and it was happening when I was a kid. But your parents taught you to deal with it. And your friends were taught to not tolerate it. So when it happened, it put itself out like a fire. And it should be happening at an elementary level, and it should carry through so that our graduates are good citizens. And I guess I agree with Ms. Crable when she said, when you go to school hungry, you don't think, but you can go to school hungry for something but food. And I think a lot of these kids are going to school and they're hungry for self-esteem. They don't get it at home, they're beaten down. They don't get it from critical race theory because they're not feeling whole. So if we don't have something in the curriculum that teaches them to be strong and coping little people, they won't be good citizens. And, you know, we're talking about a lot of people moving in here. Well, there's a lot of people like me that have moved here from Maryland because I don't want to be there anymore. I don't have any kids overflowing into your schools, but I was a social worker. I was a CASA like Pat for a lot of years. I bring a lot of quality stuff. So what can we do as volunteers? You just mentioned it too. Give us volunteer opportunities. Let us go into the classrooms. I mean, I can pass a background check. We'll put committees together and help you.
Ms. Craybill, please.
So yeah, that all very good points, and I wanted to first talk about the what we are really trying to do in our school system is called the WISC model, the whole school, whole child, whole community, so that we provide students what they need to be successful, and not every kid needs the same thing to be successful. And so some of them do need more self-esteem, and that is where their counselor, can either help them at school or they can refer their family to other places. Our student support department just moved to the building right over here, Spencer Building, and our hearing room is also going to be used as a parent engagement room. So parents can come in and talk with school people, talk with some local resources, and to get the services that they need, and maybe even just use a computer. So, and we had talked about briefly at the legislative committee, Julie Varnum had brought up, what about the community school model? And so that is another one that we can pursue. So there are a lot of different things that are out there that we are we are either doing now or we're looking to do. But to your point about volunteering, Mr. Smith's department, all hands on deck. If you reach out to them, Caleb Price is the person that can get you hooked up with a school. Like if you have a specialty interest, we can hook you up with a school. If there's a school near your house, go introduce yourself to the principal, and then help there where you can. You may or may not join their PTA or start a parent group for the parents that aren't able to form their own groups. So we do have volunteer opportunities, especially with people with expertise that you have. So reach out to the communications department or to a local school.
Ms. Walker?
So I think what you're talking about too also is there's been some really good reporting on this recently about adverse childhood experiences. A lot of that comes with higher poverty populations, but also we've just been through COVID, and I think the whole world went through something with COVID, and I think we are still in the after effects of all of those terrible experiences that we had, and a lot of us have had to be resilient, but sometimes it takes time for us to come back from that. I definitely encourage anybody that's listening that wants to get in the schools and volunteer to do so, because we need as many people as we can, I think. And the community task force is meant to look at what we can do as a community, businesses, faith-based, whatever it's going to take to bring our schools back up. It's about academics for a lot of us. It's not just about that. To your point, it's about each child and how they can learn. And to Ms. Crable's point, when you come in hungry, when maybe your clothes aren't necessarily clean, or you have a lot of trauma at home, it's very hard to learn. And that's where I think the community can really be helpful here. I mean, I wish if we had all the money in the world, I wish we could have it. But money doesn't do everything. Help human beings, and social capital help as well.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, we're coming up on time. This may be our last question, depending on the length.
So you guys were describing SEL there to help the kids. Okay, here's my question. I've been following a lot of the policy or committee meetings, not just policy. And I'm hearing a lot about really wanting to tone down the public's voice during the regular school board meetings. And one thing I keep hearing a lot is that people should be encouraged to communicate by email. Now, I try not to email too often because I respect that I'm just one person, there's a whole bunch of other people. And, but there have been a lot of times I've emailed in the past, 4 or 5 years where I get maybe one reply from one person. When I was teaching, it was standard procedure to reply as quickly as possible, but definitely not longer than 24 hours. And I've seen replies that have been sent to other people that have kind of said, I'm not going to answer your email because I'm busy. So if you're going to encourage people to communicate more via email, then what are you going to do on your side to let the person asking the question know that you read their email and what you're going to do about it?
Ms. Bradford?
I don't think people understand the volume of what we get. For example, there were 500 and some questions that we had to read just for this. Do you know how long it takes to read them and comprehend them and think about those 500 questions? So when we get 500 emails in a day, some of you email 2 or 3 times a day, it's a lot to respond to every one of those people. I'm sorry. There's no point in engaging with the 99th person that's talking about the same thing and they're using the form email that somebody sent around for them to send out. But the volume, Mr. McManus told me when I was running, you're not prepared for what's going to happen. It's an enormous quantity of email that we get. Do we read them all? We hope so. But do we respond to everyone? We'd have to triple the time zones. There's just not enough time in every day to respond to every single email that we get. I'm sorry, it's just a fact of life. They're just not.
Mr. McManus.
I guess my wife's probably looking to see what I say and listening. I try to respond to all of my emails. I think some people I've heard that I do respond. But if your email is threatening, or if you're using profanity, or you're being nasty in any shape, form, or fashion, I don't respond. Now, that's an exception to the rule. Doesn't happen a lot. But I do try to respond. And I spend hours a day. But when I ran for the board, I'm walking my talk when I was a principal. Visibility, accessibility, and listening. Even if I disagree with you or you disagree with me, we still need to have that exchange. And so I try to respond. I don't know if any of you out there in that group I respond to, but I try. And it does. It takes hours. Matter of fact, I have lost time with my family, but I made a commitment and I'm going to continue to do it. But it takes time and it's not easy. We meet all the time. We're on the phone all the time. We can't have more than 3 on the phone one time. We can't have a meeting with more than 3 because we're trying not to break state law or someone to stand up and say, oh, by the way, 4 of you meeting. If there are 4 of you meeting, I don't care what you're talking about, you're breaking basically the perception 4 people are meeting. So I understand, and I did tell Ms. Bradford, I said, you don't have a clue what you're getting into as far as the time element. So I just have to share. And I think most people try to respond, but it is impossible. It's very tough if you just don't take time away from what you are used to doing. And I've challenged Peter, who says he speaks at every meeting. He's always the most professional individual I've ever dealt with. He says, sang for us. I've met with him 2 or 3 times off campus to listen to him. We don't always agree. But we do talk and we do listen. And I try to be honest with him and he tries to be honest with me. That's all we can do. We're not going to agree on every single thing, no matter who we are or who we aren't.
So with that, Mr. Chairman, we've reached our allocated time. I can turn it back over to you. I'll remind the audience we have 2 more of these scheduled in this or a similar format this year. And with that, sir, I'll turn it over to you.
Once again, I'd like to, on behalf of the board, thank everybody for being here today. I think it was some very, very good dialogue, some good questions. We have some homework to do after this. We will continue to reach out to you and try to get more questions answered for you. But with that, we are at time, so I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
We have a first?
Second.
We have a second way out there? Okay, thank you very much. We have a first and second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you again for coming this evening.